Welcome back to the book log, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Of every post-apocalypse book or story I've ever seen or read, I think The Road is easily the most apocalyptic. Just to set the scene, this story follows a father and son who are referred to throughout the book simply as the man and the boy as they travel along a road in a post-apocalypse. However, this isn't the kind of post-apocalyptic world that's damaged or like struggling to recover. This is a world that's already dead. It's like a post apocalypse. It's the end of the world. Every tree and plant is gone. Forests are just fields of blackened trunks. Nothing ever grows back. All the animals are extinct. There's no wildlife, no birds, no insects, nothing moving except a presumably very small number of humans. The entire landscape is gray and buried under ash. Burnt corpses are strewn all about. The sky is permanently blotted out by a dull haze, so you can never actually see the sun, and it's always cold. As a result, food doesn't exist in any normal sense. Everything edible has to be scavenged from abandoned houses or bunkers, and even that's running out. Most people are already dead, and the few who do remain are either barely surviving or slaves or cannibals. There's no sense that things might get better. The world has passed the point of recovery. One thing that's mildly interesting about this is that the cause of the apocalypse is never revealed. It only gets one sentence of explanation in the entire book, which is that there was a long shear of light and a series of concussions. You could speculate about it being an asteroid or a supervolcano or nuclear war or something, but the explanation is obviously left unclear on purpose because that's not really the focus or the point of the story. On a literal level, this is a survival story. There's not really a plot besides the man and the boy traveling along the road and the various things they see and encounter along the way. There's a lot of repetition in this book. Cormac McCarthy really tries to drill home the bleak reality of this world over and over again. They walk along the road in the daytime, going from town to town and scrounging through abandoned houses, trying to find anything edible. Then at night, they usually camp under a dirty tarp a little ways off into the woods somewhere so as not to be seen. There are a few interesting episodes throughout the book that kind of break up this monotony, but it's almost never anything pleasant. Once they see a roving band of cannibals with slaves tied up in chains being followed by a bunch of pregnant women. Once when they're looking for food in a house, they find a basement hatch, and when they go down to explore it, it's filled with a bunch of dirty, naked people, including one whose legs have been cut off, who beg them for help. Once they stumble on a recently abandoned campsite that includes a baby who had been roasted on a spit. Just mostly really fucked up things are happening to them all the time. The world is still mostly gray and empty and void of people, but most of those who are still around have been reduced to these desperate monsters. For a while, the man and the boy's goal is just to reach the coast, and they both have this sort of fantastical notion that somehow things will be better or different there. But of course, once they arrive, it's the same. The ocean is gray and cold and filled with ash, just like everything else. There are millions of bird and fish bones stretching down the whole coastline, broken ships floating around, just desolation. And laying it all out like this makes it sound like just about the most depressing book ever written, and in a lot of ways it is, but at the same time, Cormac McCarthy is using this bleakness to draw our attention to these two characters, the man and the boy, who are really what this book is about and who keep it from just collapsing under the weight of its own despair. Through these two characters, Cormac McCarthy, to me, is trying to show how things like love and moral responsibility can still exist in a world where every single external structure that once supported them is gone. A mantra they return to again and again in the book is that they are carrying the fire, and I think this is sort of the book's central idea. It's a little vague, but I think that's also intentional to some degree. Them carrying the fire is like an internal commitment to goodness in the face of annihilation. I think that's what's so interesting when compared to how thoroughly this book portrays the apocalypse. There are a lot of really great lines in here about how difficult it is to exist and persevere in a world where even the presumption of a future is totally gone. The apocalypse is also the extinction of context and the extinction of history. There is nothing left, including even a frame of reference. So it's a question of what happens to meaning when there's no one left to remember or interpret anything at all. Being human, in spite of all that, feels like it should be impossible, but for some reason they are compelled to do it anyway. The man sort of understands this on a practical level, but the boy really embodies it. Throughout the book, the boy consistently shows more empathy than his father. He worries about strangers, he wants to help people they encounter, and he's genuinely distressed by suffering even when it puts them at risk. The man usually sees this as like dangerous and naive, but Cormac McCarthy frames it as the boy possessing a moral clarity that the man doesn't always see. It's almost like this world is so brutal and it's so hard to survive in it that there's this excuse for infinite cruelty, but the boy's insistence on compassion is what defines them as the good guys. Another thing that's interesting about this is that the man constantly refers to the boy in almost divine terms. He describes the boy as his warrant, his reason for living, his proof that God exists and hasn't abandoned the universe. And even though there is no future left because it's the very tail end of the whole world, meaning somehow still seems to exist anyway. I see a lot of people say The Road is a hopeful book, which is kind of ridiculous on its face, but this I think is what they're referring to. Even in the midst of the total obliteration of civilization and humanity, some inherent ephemeral goodness is still there. Goodness does not require good conditions. That's what they mean when they say they are carrying the fire, and that's how this book rejects total nihilism, even though it's walking a fine line. I think the very last paragraph of the book is very interesting with all this in mind. It's this little aside about how trout used to live in streams in the mountains, and he describes what they looked like and what they smelled like and how that world is now gone forever. Cormac McCarthy forces you to experience the present as if it were already lost. When he describes trout as something that used to exist, he's turning life itself into a memory. It's like an elegy for the world of the novel, but also our own world. We're imagining a future vantage point from which everything we take for granted now has vanished. Because someday the world will end. Maybe not like how it happens in The Road, but eventually the sun will swallow up the earth and the last human beings will die. And when that happens, even the most ordinary facts of life, like a trout swimming through a stream, will feel miraculous in hindsight. The passage is sort of asking us to sit with how astonishing it is that life exists at all inside a universe that will eventually erase everything. So even though The Road is incredibly bleak and mournful, it's also a reminder of how rare and lucky it is to be here now before the end of the world. I think we're gonna have to give this book a 10.